Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys Discussing Software.
Two Irish guys, Tomas.
Thank you, Brendan. Two Irish Guys Discussing Software. My name is Tomas O'Leary, joined here by my very good friend Brendan Walsh.
It's good to be here.
Delighted to have you. This is the podcast where we talk about everything in the software world, software news, ways of avoiding getting ripped off, alternative ideas, innovations, best ways to save money, and ultimately helping you take back control. And they say across the water. Take back control of your software budget, take back control of your software licenses, and take back control of the relationship you have with your mega vendors, which we like to talk about. And we've one in particular we like to talk about, which is
IBM.
Absolutely, it's IBM. It's been a while since we've had this podcast.
Had a bit of a pause.
Yes,
because you've been traveling, I think.
Yes.
Enjoying yourself.
Yes, I was in Japan. I've had a fantastic time, and I have
not such a great result for the Irish in Japan, mind you.
No, it was a bit of a disaster, the rugby. But
Yeah.
the country is amazing. It is one of the most efficient countries. It's one of the safest countries in the world. You would, honestly, you'd love it. It's beautiful. It's packed full of people, yet you don't feel like it's squashed on the sardine. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I saw some of the photos. Looks very clean.
Yes,
Yeah.
very clean, very clean.
But I don't think it was a disastrous World Cup. I think it was good for the country and for rugby, but just not good for us.
As Irish people, it was terrible.
Yeah.
But for rugby in general, South Africa winning the World Cup was brilliant for them. And I think ultimately, in the day, the best team won. And Japan, as a nation, totally embraced it. I mean, they sold out of all this replica jerseys. You couldn't buy a replica jersey anywhere in Japan.
They like merchandising, I'd say.
They do. They couldn't get them kind of made quick enough. And
a lot has been happening while you've been away. So we've a lot to catch up on.
So the podcast topic today is, we're going to be joined later by Mark Bartrick, a very good friend of mine from Forrester Research. And our topic today is really to look at what you're doing with your budget in 2020. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the news before we ask what Mark will join us in about kind of 10 minutes time, but there's been lots of things happening. I mean, can we talk about our favorite topic, IBM? We have to talk about that.
It's on the list.
What have they been doing? They've been selling more companies, I believe.
They have. They continue to divest, and as was said by Gina Rometty, she'll divest anything that seems practical. So we've had the Red Hat divestment, we had the Watson marketing, the Red Hat acquisition, but that was followed by the HCL divestment. We had the Watson marketing divestment to Centerbridge.
And what have they done now?
Algorithmics. So they sold their Algorithmics product, which they only acquired about, I think it's 8 years ago for close to 400 million. And they've sold that off to SS&C. So another legacy product. We see that a lot actually in our business, but another legacy product sold off, more than likely to try and fund the $34 billion that they spent on Red Hat. Yeah.
And they're treating their staff badly again. They're treating it bad. I don't know whether you saw this news. The Register this week talking about new acronym IBM Lock Money is the new acronym. Is the new one. Apparently, according to a 17-year sales veteran from California who's suing IBM in the courts of California for not having a contract. That's very unlike IBM. Not having a contract, and allegedly not paying commission.
So it's not about not having a transparent contract, just not having one at all.
By all accounts, apparently it's having no account, and apparently their defence, according to the Register, was actually that very fact: no enforceable contract. Can you believe it?
You got to read the T's and C's. Yeah. But and speaking of acquisitions and Red Hat and so forth, so Eric Shander, who was the finance chief in Red Hat since that acquisition, and speaking of not wanting maybe to pay out an obligation, so he's been let go. Very little has been said since his departure, other than he's been let go for not maintaining workplace standards in Red Hat, where he's been for quite a while. But he loses out on a $4 million dollar retention bonus. So had he stayed, or had he been allowed to stay, he was due to be paid $4 million in 2 tranches over a 12-month period. But that apparently is off the table now because
there's a soap opera here. There's 100% soap opera here. And I can
been
see
very quiet though since.
But the central character and the JR of Dallas, as they might say, is Ginny Rometty.
Yeah, well, maybe Eric Shander will turn up in a shower in a few episodes' time with a bit of a backlash. So,
but in all seriousness, Ginny Rometty now, she's in the company 8 years. 8 years. She took over the organisation. This is finishing on nearly 8 years from Sam Palisvano. The company's gone from turnover of over 100 billion to turnover of less than 75 billion potentially this year, depending on the numbers come out. You're looking at a 25% reduction over those years. Stock value was in excess of 200 billion as a company. It's now 120 billion or less, depending on the time or day of the week you're looking at the stock. So there's some, and they've what has she been doing? What has she been doing in those 8 years? Like honestly, it's like you just talked about the divestitures,
selling assets.
Yeah.
Some of the former acquisitions that haven't worked, like Watson. Watson was basically a bit of a failure. Sell that off, and then try something else. So putting all their money into the Red Hat acquisition, which is one of the only performing divisions at the moment. It is up 19% year on year, but for the last quarter, but the overall group revenue is down. You
couldn't give IBM credit for that. I mean, the Red Hat was growing. Red Hat was growing anyway before they bought them, and IBM has spent 34 billion. They're still they generate a lot of cash.
Very different companies. One very transparent open source company versus one very locked down, totally not transparent. I think the CEO of Red Hat said we should be maintained like the Switzerland of Europe. They want to be just left alone to do their own thing, not be brought into the fold, because that's the best thing for the company.
But they're going to have to stop buying back their stock, because that's constant money. I mean, if they're going to make this acquisition work, they've got to pay. They've got to pay for it, and they've got to invest in it. So they're going to have to some stage stop buying their stock. But also how they're treating their staff. Are they going to do the same thing to Red Hat that they've done to their own teams?
The Red Hat employees will not hang around to find out if they see a trend. That's the type of people who work for Red Hat are not the type of people that would traditionally work for IBM. They would be much more free thinking and open minded and as transparent. So that's a risk. That's why I think they want to remain as Switzerland. They want to maintain their own culture because they would have two very different cultures.
The jury's really out still. The jury's really out. I mean, if you even look at the last 3 months since we last spoke, the Dow. What's happened in the stock market now, you nor I are even remotely close to being any sort of even amateur expert in this stuff. But just looking at them, just pure news, it's up about 1,000 points.
It's tremendous.
It's up about 1,000 points. Yeah. But IBM's gone nowhere. It's been up and down, but it's actually pretty much the same. We sat here 3 months ago, stock price is broadly the same. Hasn't moved at all.
Pretty stagnant.
Yeah. It went up and it's gone down again since they've announced some results, which again.
They've announced results which are not great overall. I mean, they boast about cloud revenues being up, but overall revenues are down. I'm not so sure about those cloud numbers. We talked about that in previous podcasts as to what's really cloud revenue, meaning those dual entitlement licenses that we talked about that are attributed that go to the cloud revenue line. Not so sure about that because actually most of them are perpetual licenses. But I read a little snippet I thought that was quite interesting that since 1916 IBM have failed to pay out on a quarterly dividend. So despite the failures, dividends the cash is flowing back to the shareholders. So
since the Psalm.
So from the customers to the shareholders, that's free cash flow is good.
So the jury's out. Let's see how that soap opera develops. There's been a couple of other things that have been happening in the last few months. I'm involved in the organisation Free ICT, the non-profit organisation that promotes the secondary market here in Europe. We had a report that was published, was picked up by a couple of organisations, an economic impact assessment produced by Deloitte, looking at the importance of the secondary market in Europe. A couple of headline pieces from that, and I won't go into the detail because there was a press launch on it. But I think what was really interesting is the size of what we measure was the aftermarket, which is basically mostly the IT services industry, which includes third-party maintenance. It doesn't include the acquisition of software, but it does include software maintenance. But in Europe, it's estimated to be about 46 billion with 220,000 people employed. The analysis that was done, though, the secondary market, if it's embraced properly here in Europe, is potential to grow the number of jobs by about 100,000 jobs in the next 3 to 4 years, but reduce the spend. Reduce the spend. Because there's a huge amount of waste, and this is something we're going to talk with Mark shortly. I mean, for organizations who are spending money every year, this is a big, big problem for them. Every year they're looking at where are we wasting money. There's a massive amount of waste in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, it's software in itself is the second highest spend category in an organization, but the margins that organizations make, such as SAP and Oracle, are savage, as we say here in Ireland.
Yeah.
In the 80 to 90% category. So there's a huge amount of profit we made, a huge amount of waste. So it's not surprising they're impressive figures from that report.
Yeah. We had another report where our own organisation was mentioned it.
We
did a webinar on it recently.
We did. Myself and our colleague Sinead did a webinar. It was on the Gartner report, which was a report relating to the third-party software maintenance market. So a number of vendors, including yourselves, related to IBM software, third-party support for IBM software mentioned. And yeah, it was pretty conclusive. I mean, the guide basically said to the readers, do not neglect, to look at your options. Do not neglect to look at the cost related to maintenance. Do not neglect to look at the options and ways of reducing it. Pretty conclusive. I talked about the market, the increase in the market. The market's growing very fast, so much like the Deloitte report, the third-party support market for software support is increasing at 33%. Again, not surprising. We see that all the time in our own industry. It's growing very fast. The analysts talk about it all the time, and they talked about the ways, why people are doing it, when you should investigate it, and ultimately the cost savings of around 50% that you can make on looking at alternatives. So very, very impressive report.
It's really only, though, the main top 3 mega vendors. It's Oracle, IBM, SAP are the three ones that they're focused on.
Yes, there was, and it mentioned specifically that there was no identifiable third-party maintainer for Microsoft. That was kind of called out in the report.
Yeah.
There is a secondary market for Microsoft. There's a second-hand market for software or Microsoft licenses.
Here in Europe.
Yeah. In Europe because of legislation. So that's a very strong market and growing. But it did say, though, that because of the growth in the market, it mentioned a number of vendors. We were the only vendor that provides third-party support for IBM, some primary vendors for SAP and Oracle, but because of the size of the market, because users and consumers of the software are shifting to third party, that other vendors will eventually arise. But it was interesting report, and it was the first of its kind, so it was nice to get a mention.
Yeah, and speaking of some of the mega vendors, I noticed Bill McDermott has left SAP.
Right.
Did you heard that?
I had heard that, yeah.
ServiceNow getting his services.
Right.
Pretty quick move, actually. He's had his notice. I think it was only back in September or late September, early October, and he's already in the hot seat already. If not sitting there, he's on his way into the room with ServiceNow. But SAP have been creating a bit of news.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I read some of this online when I was actually reading some LinkedIn posts. It was actually Mark's post. Mark will come in a minute, that indicated that SAP are doing pretty well themselves. Their cloud bookings were up 38%, which is pretty impressive. Their cloud revenue is up 37%, and their total revenue is up 30%. Interestingly, their software license revenue is down, only by 1%. So impressive numbers from SAP. Not surprising, I suppose. The numbers are up, but who's paying for that? I think it's coming out of the pocket of the consumers of the solution. So if you read the report we just referred to from Gartner, I think their margins or profit margins on software maintenance are around 90%. Is that correct? 80 to 90%. So it's pretty high.
Yeah. I think that's research been done. If you looked at even Forrester, they've done similar research. And speaking of Forrester and SAP, and the blog post you mentioned, we'd like to bring in Mark Bartrick. Mark, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thomas, good to hear your voice.
Mark, lovely to talk to you. Mark, we've been friends for quite some time. We've done work together. I've been at conferences together, at Forrester Research conferences. It's really good to have you on the show. Where are you? What have you been working on? I presume you're in the UK today?
Yes, I've been traveling a bit, but I'm in the UK today, which is always good to get back on home turf. A little bit jealous of your trip, I think, Thomas. You're in Japan for the Rugby World Cup. Um, Neither of our
Yeah.
teams did very well, and I don't really want to talk about England's performance in the final, but there you go. So, but yes, I've been traveling with work. I've been pretty much helping clients a lot in Europe and in North America, particularly recently, and just helping them. My day-to-day job is to help clients negotiate better deals with the big software vendors. That obviously includes the likes of Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, IBM, of course. And in fact, most recent success was with a US company on an SAP maintenance contract. And the net result was we managed to take $7 million out of that annual support costs with SAP. And that's SAP who, in their contract, say you cannot reduce maintenance. So quite an interesting conundrum for many SAP customers when they're struggling to get rid of shelfware, which was the situation for that particular client. I think they had about 30% of product they'd bought, but were never going to use, yet were still paying maintenance. And that was their big bugbear, and they had to sort that out. So I managed to jump in and help them get $7 million out. So that's a nice little saving.
Wow, that is really impressive. And can I ask, did they change the service? So is the service the exact same service, just reduce the price by 7 million?
Exact same service, the SAP support. Yes, there are third-party support providers who can jump in and halve that price, but the client, for whatever reason, they didn't want to go that route. They wanted to stay with SAP and take advantages of some of the consulting side that they've got there. But the net of it was they had 30% of shelfware. It was costing them a fortune on an annual basis. And SAP's initial reaction was, well, the contract says you pay whether you use the software or not. That's what their
Yeah.
contract says. But there's no reasonableness about that. That's not logical. So what we had to do is create negotiation leverage for the client, find a reason for SAP to internally convince their management that actually this is an important client going forward. There are potential for cloud revenues for SAP going forward, but they had to play fair today and get rid of this shelfware issue if SAP wanted to enjoy future revenues, particularly cloud. And obviously SAP, you talked about the numbers earlier, Brendan. SAP are really moving strongly into the cloud, and it's a big success area for them there. And that is the big motivation for their sales guys. When they look at their compensation plan, they get paid to sell cloud and get people onto SAP cloud, not anybody else's cloud, SAP's cloud. And there's a huge, huge push on that. So finding leverage with that kind of carrot hanging out there was, an opportunity that this client took advantage of. And the net result was SAP did the right thing. They cut out the shelfware costs, got rid of that maintenance without switching it, which they often try to do, without switching it into cloud credit. So effectively keep the revenue stream, but change it from on-premise maintenance to cloud spend is what their salespeople try to do. And we managed to break that formula and just got their prices cut.
And how we ended up in a situation where there's so much shelfware? I had a conversation yesterday with a financial services company in the US, who, when I was explaining the kind of modus operandi to these individuals on the call, I was saying the modus operandi of the mega vendors, in particular, in this case was IBM, is to sell you stuff that you either want nor need. And the guy goes on the phone back to me, which is basically shelfware. He goes, yes, and actually they're very upfront about it. They actually tell us their job is to sell you stuff that neither you want nor need. I was going, you are joking me. I thought at least they'd have the decency to not admit it, or at least try to hide it. But how did we end up in this situation with so much shelfware out there?
I tell you what, I think there's two things that have created that. One is the way salespeople are paid in the IT industry. They're paid to maximize revenues, and they want to bundle as much up front as they possibly can. And they'll tell a client, hey, look, if you just buy a bit more than you need today, we can get you an extra point discount on the whole lot. So there's some financial advantage to the client to buy stuff today they don't need today. And that's how salespeople bundle it, because obviously that's how they're commissioned. The bigger the deal now is, the bigger the commission pot and paycheck they get. So that's one of the reasons that this crazy situation's developed around clients having a lot of shelfware about. One of the other ones is client vendors like to bundle stacks of product and sell it as a bundle. And the reason they do that, I mean, what they say to clients is, look, if you buy the bundle, it's cheaper than buying a la carte. Okay, well, there's some financial incentive there. But usually in any bundle, there's 3 or 4 good products and one or two dud ones. And the bundling is the way the vendor can offload a bunch of dud products, because the client, clients are buying the bundles, vendors are selling the bundles, vendors can claim they've sold a whole bunch of products, including some of the dud ones, and they're just getting product off their books and revenue in their bank account. So it's kind of those two things. It's how salespeople are motivated is creating shelfware, and I mean, pretty much every client I go to's got it, whatever the vendor, and also the way they package and bundle products creates shelfware. I had another client who's, believe it or not, got shelfware with Salesforce. Now they're a SaaS company.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Are the cloud guys doing the same thing? So I was just thinking, that was the next question. Is it happening in the cloud world too, clearly?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, perhaps even more so. Because a lot of customers, they're very familiar with buying on-premise products, perpetual licenses with a nice little maintenance stream. Everybody's very used to that. But the cloud world, even though it's been around for a few years now, it seems like a lot of clients are jumping into it almost blindfolded. They're not really asking the right questions. They're not checking and testing what they're being proposed. And I'm coming across, I mentioned Salesforce there. I came across a Salesforce client the other day who bought way too much software, and yet contractually they're still obliged to pay the subscription for it for the remainder of the term. They bought a 5-year term. They're about year 3 now, just beyond year 3. They came to me and said, can we do anything about it? And I said, well, no, you're contractually obliged to pay for this stuff. And like many software as a service vendors, and by the way, I think that's the wrong phrase for these guys. I don't think it is software as a service. To me, software as a service is like electricity. It's utility. You should be able to turn it up and down each month. And no, Salesforce are not that. Workday are not that. SAP, Oracle, Microsoft are not that. They're just traditional vendors who are selling what they call software as a service, but it's really just cloud. It's subscription revenue. And the problem clients have is when they first sign that contract, they put a baseline on number of users and minimum spend based on that users. And the contracts say you can't reduce it. It's not like electricity, you can turn it off this month and pay less next month. You can't turn off your Salesforce contract midterm and say, we just want less users. So all of that creates clients who either buy too much to start with and then find they never use it or never implement it in the speed they thought they would. And therefore, 2 or 3 years in, they go, you know what, we're paying, I don't know, $4 million a year for this stuff. And we're actually only using $2 million, but we're contractually obliged to pay for the remainder of the term. And there's your shelfware in the cloud.
Would you ever, Mark, advise clients to stop locking themselves in for such long terms? Because 5 years is a long time and things change, and it's hard to predict. But it seems like a long time, and therefore they end up in this predicament 2 or 3 years into the contract where they're locked in for another couple of years, and it's just more waste, as we referred to earlier.
It is. I quite agree with you. I would never recommend anybody signs a 5-year anything in the IT world, whatever the vendor is, whatever the product or service, unless, the 5-year price is 50% of the 3-year price. If there's an incredible financial incentive, yeah, maybe think about it. But there aren't in the deals that I'm seeing. When vendors, whoever they are, offering 5-year over 3 years, they're not really offering much more financially to make that lock-in happen. And I think the industry is moving so fast and so quickly that it's crazy to do long-term deals. 3 years, the maximum for any multi-year deal, especially where there's a financial, component to that makes it a good thing to do. But 5 years is just, I think, way too long, because the products you buy today won't exist in 3 years, let alone 5. Even, if you take Salesforce, for example, Marketing Cloud, if you put that into a 5-year contract today, that Marketing Cloud will not be the same product within about 2 to 3 years, and maybe called something completely different by 5. And they may have acquired a company that's completely replaced the one you bought today anyway. So they created a whole new Marketing Cloud, which is a way better product, but you're locked into the old one. So you can see, doing things on a long-term basis these days it's just crazy, and that's where shelfware comes from, and that's where money. You talked about waste earlier. There's so many places people waste money in this business, and I'll just give you a quick statistic. I was with a bunch of CIOs a couple of weeks ago in London, and we were just talking about, their drivers and motivations and budgets, by the way, for 2020. What's focusing their mind, and we can talk about the budgets piece in a minute. But on the waste side, that was the biggest thing. They all said to me, the biggest thing we hate is the amount of money we waste. The problem they got is they don't know where they're wasting the money. It's like there's an old advertising analogy, wasn't it? It said, the guy was asked, of your advertising budget, how much of that is good and how much is just bad and waste. And the guy said, well, I think it's about 50-50. I just don't know which 50% is the good bit. And I think with IT people, they're buying software or they're paying for support services. And to a greater degree, most of the CIOs really just don't know where the waste is. They know they're doing it. And just around the table, I had about 8 CIOs around the table. And on average, they reckon about 30% of their spend is waste. They just don't know where it is. Now, you take, some of those CIOs had budgets of $100 million plus around the table, and they know at least 30 million is waste. They just don't know where it is.
But is it fair that they should they know? I mean, advertising is a little bit. I think your analogy works to a certain extent, but with IT, these things can be. I mean, there's always going to be waste. You always have. I mean, every business has. You got people coming into the business who don't know your business yet, and they cost you money, and they're not performing yet because they have to learn the business. People going out the door that's at a HR level. You've got technology that you're using, but you can identify. It is identifiable. Is it just these organizations are too big? Is the whole industry too complicated? Have we just have we ended up with a situation where this whole industry is so overcomplicated that even no matter how clever we all are, we just can't figure it out?
I think you're right. I mean, and then that's partly the tech vendors. They deliberately made things obtuse or complicated, or just cloud. The old smoke and mirrors. They just made everything sound complicated and just you just can't find your way through. And I think, but it shouldn't be that way. Of course, it shouldn't be that way. And I think today, for canny CIOs, the ones who have a grip on what they're doing, what they're spending, who they're working with, and how they're spending their money, those CIOs have a much better view on this. They don't have the 50-50 advertising problem. They probably have waste of 10% or less, but they still recognize they got some. But the canny ones have got smarter in a number of areas. And those areas I suspect are, number one, when they first do a deal with a vendor or any renewal, they make sure they negotiate market best rates, so they don't leave money on the table. By the way, most CIOs don't do that. Most CIOs rely on procurement teams who often negotiate good but not excellent deals. So right up front, they're wasting money when they do a deal with a vendor or do a renewal. That's one thing. Then the second thing is, when you're running that software, you want to make sure that you're managing and controlling it. So great software asset management tools, there's loads of them existing today. They can really help you make sure that you are optimizing your usage of what you've contracted for, and reharvesting stuff you're not, that shelfware stuff, and and giving that to other users rather than buying new stuff or doubling up and duplicating. So asset management tools is great. And then, of course, your ongoing spend, your OPEX spend of support costs, which, is your business in the IBM world. A lot of clients, they just think you've got to stay with your existing software vendor for support. And they think, well, if they wrote the software, they're the best guys to support it. Well, no, they're not. And there's a whole load of reasons for that. We've written papers on it, and your whole business is based on this. So canny CIOs are selectively looking at third-party maintenance providers like Origina, and are saying, hey, look, we can use some or all of this in some or all of our spaces. So to make sure that they're not wasting money in that ongoing OPEX support area. So three big things there. Do the deal right up front. Don't waste money when you first do it. So that means negotiating the best deal. Secondly, use asset tools to make sure you're only using what you need to use and reharvesting what you can. And then thirdly, include in your portfolio an element of third-party support. Not only will it save you money, but it also keep the vendors that retain their support, more honest, because they recognize there's competition in the space. So, those three areas, if you're doing those as a CIO, then you're probably reducing that waste from on average 30%, which was around the table the other week with the CIOs I was with, to probably closer to 10%. I don't think you'll get it down to zero, but I think you can get a lot closer. You just got to get smarter with how you buy and then what you do with what you've bought. That's my recommendations.
And then bringing this forward to those canny CIOs in 2020 then, and they're looking at their budget. What?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? That's what they need to do?
Yes. I think if going into 2020, I mean, obviously today, it's budget season right now. October, November is usually budget season for pretty much most companies, most organizations, private and public sector. Everyone's looking at how their spend's going to be in 2020. For a few lucky CIOs, the CEO or CFO's given them a bigger budget because they recognize technology with AI and all sorts of stuff going on. It needs to be a massive driver going forward. But for most CIOs, they got to struggle with the same or a lower budget because money's tight. And for those CIOs who got to fund new innovation, they got to find new technology, got to get into AI and connect better with their customers. So they got to do more, but with less. What have they got to do? They've got to get canny along the 3 points I mentioned earlier: buy right, use right, and then optimize and reduce your ongoing spend. They need to do those things across their budget space, because I think I saw some statistics from, I think it was Deloitte or somebody like that, and it was something like, of an IT budget, something like 60% is hung up in legacy spend. Legacy is, stuff you've already got today. It's keeping the lights on. It's paying annual maintenance and support, all that sort of good stuff. And if, with those kind of numbers, that's a huge amount of money. For the $100 million budget, that's $60 million is just locked away, and you can't do anything with it. So you look at 2020 and you've already lost 60 million of a 100 million budget. Whereas canny CIOs would go, hang on, there is waste in that. There is soft negotiable money we can free out of that, either by renegotiating the contracts, better asset management, or looking at third-party support. And they could free up money from that 60 million, that 60%, to pay for more of the innovation that they have to do, they need to do, or else the companies are just going to get left behind. So, when it is budget season now, and my comment here is, don't think that legacy spend is just a locked away. It's just done. Let's forget that and think about the innovative budget we got. Canny CIOs are putting teams in place to go after that 60% and say, look, can we do this better? Without reducing the quality of service that we get, or the quality of products, or replacing product, dumping products. How can we just do it for less? And canny CIOs are actively, requesting procurement to go after it, but also they're doing it themselves.
So, Mark, we're close to the end of 2019. We're nearing 2020. Are there still deals to be done? I mean, obviously SAP and IBM's year ends are coming up. Sales guys are getting anxious. They're below target. Are there still deals to be done by the candy CIOs? I mean, is it too late? Can they mobilize to take action on some of the things you've just suggested?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right. This is the sales frenzy for IBM and SAP. December 31st year ends. This is the quarter when both of those vendors will do a significant chunk of their renewals and new business, as their salespeople, fight to get over the line and get on that, that trip to Barbados or whatever their trip is next year. So that being the case, and both vendors desperately looking for money and revenues. You talked earlier in this podcast about IBM and their numbers. SAP they've got some very good numbers, but they're under heavy pressure to push on and have a very successful quarter. With Bill McDermott having left, there's a wobble in the marketplace there as they thought about, what's SAP going forward? What are they going to do? Are they can continue the momentum they've got? So all of that plays into the sales deals that are happening this quarter, November, December. And for any client who's negotiating a new deal or renegotiating an existing deal or support contract, they should be looking hard at that, and they should be negotiating hard on that basis, because the power in the negotiation right now is with the client, not with the vendor. Okay, the vendor's proposing stuff and they're the ones who are saying this is the price you got to pay. But in terms of actually doing the deal and doing it at a fair price, the negotiation leverage is on the client side of the client right now. So, make best use of that. Make hay while the sun shines.
What percentage of pick an IBM for the moment or SAP, what percentage of their annual S&S support revenues do you think they're executing in Q4, in this Q4 leading up to the end of December? Is it 50%?
I would think it's at least 50%. If you're just talking about support, maintenance and support, I think the vast majority aligns with IBM's year end. Most clients have done that as a canny negotiation tactic years ago. So I think the more than 50% of support is probably right aligned for this quarter for the like of an IBM. In terms of software deals, it's probably 40% of their annual sales, I'd imagine, is new licenses or license sales happening this quarter. So, that's still a very substantial number. So it's like that, if you've seen that hockey stick curve that a lot of sales teams get shown every year, just to remind them that a lot of renewals occur in the fourth quarter of their fiscal year. They're on the hockey curve right now at IBM and SAP. But don't forget all the other vendors. I mean, Oracle's half year is November. Salesforce's year end is January. So actually, Salesforce are in their fourth quarter now. They're on the hockey curve. So, there's a lot of vendors out there whose salespeople are just running around in frenzy.
And some of these kind of ideas we talked about, Mark, are there risks associated with companies going down the road of looking at these cost-saving initiatives you've talked about at the county CIO? What are the risks with that?
Well, the risks are minimal if you approach it in the right way. If for those three things I said, if you buy right up front, if you negotiate, a market best deal, there's no risk to that. You still buy the products you want in the way that you want it. They still deliver and implement it in the way you want it and support it in the way you want it. You've just paid a little less for it right up front. And then that carries through all the years, because obviously, maintenance is typically a percentage of net price and renewals a percentage of the net. So, it's good to do it right up front. So there's no risk to your vendor relationship or getting the wrong products if you do it that way. Asset management, software asset management, if you do that right, reharvest and all that sort of good stuff, the vendor's not going to get upset about that. The fact that you're reharvesting unused licensing, using them elsewhere. They might get upset about some Microsoft deals in Europe if you resell some of that software into the second-hand market. But, that's just them throwing their teddy out the pram. I mean, they're not going to do anything about that realistically. That's just the way of the world these days. And then if they go to third-party support, you look at Fortune 500 companies, there's a whole list of them have done it and are doing it, and more people are doing it every year. The growth of the market is amazing. You talked about that Gartner report earlier. We've done similar reports. That market is just growing. There's no risk to clients in doing that. But obviously you have to go in it with your eyes open and understand you're entering a slightly different marketplace where you're not going to get necessarily new upgrades to new releases. But for many of these software vendors, they're not investing in new releases. There's nothing coming down the pipe. So why are you funding nothing? So, from a risk perspective, for all of those three elements there, if a canny CIO can diminish the risk to zero, but get on with saving money.
Yeah, and actually, the interesting thing about some of the risks, obviously we would agree with you on most of those points. I think one of the things is as well, people forget, many of that 60% you talked about, the legacy technology, that is really nothing very much is happening, either by the client or the vendor. What happens is over time, that the vendors and the customers end up with less expertise with that technology. It's still keeping the lights on. And if the lights go off, actually that could become a risk. Suddenly becomes a problem. So in actual fact, one of the arguments we often use is that you actually need to watch out. Be careful as you get closer to the end of your journey, that you may, if you have a problem, you may have even though you're spending money, you may have nobody that you can really rely on to actually look after it. So it could become a big issue for you down the line if you're not careful. Because as you look at the thing we talked about at the top of the podcast, the number of people, we talked about how they're treating some of their staff in California, but we've talked on these podcasts before, the number of staff that IBM have let go, that Oracle have let go, that SAP have let go across, they're hiring, yes, but the core technology products that they make most of the money in still, the database licenses for Oracle or many of the legacy technology pieces from IBM, make a huge amount of money. The reason they make a huge amount of money is that the customers don't make any calls, customers aren't making any changes, and therefore they've let the staff go. They don't have the people. So if too many people come with a problem, I think there's a real issue there. And that's where some of these alternative ideas you talked about are going to actually potentially reduce risk, not increase risk.
Like I spoke to a client today, I speak to clients all the time, but back in late last year, they did one of those multi-year deals Mark was mentioning, and some of their products were, they had Lotus, they had Unica, they had WebSphere Commerce, they had a bunch of those products that have then in July 19, during the first year of their multi-year deal, were sold. They got no heads up. Now the products that they had entered into a multi-year maintenance deal on are no longer owned by IBM, and so now they have to deal with a different vendor. They don't know the roadmap, so there's no assurity, and so that the risk there was they did a multi-year deal. They could have done something different. They didn't, and now they're stuck.
Yeah.
And it was unforeseen.
It's good advice from you, Mark. Mark, tell us, what is, over the last kind of 12, 18 months, you must have seen some clever ideas out there. Is there any one that stands out in terms of and that people listening to this podcast could say, actually, that's something they can hang their hat? You've mentioned, obviously, a number of them. Is there any one particular one that you say, this is the one I would really be looking at in 2020?
For me, and I know it sounds like you probably bought me a few Guinnesses to say this, but you haven't. But for me, 2020, third-party support is a mature marketplace, and a canny CIO should have that in their armory for 2020. Whether they're using it today or not, they should definitely put it in their armory for 2020. They should certainly evaluate the market, and whether they put some or all of their particular vendors' stuff out to a third-party support, just the fact you're looking at it and doing it seriously and maybe putting some of it out creates competitive pressure and negotiation leverage for the remainder that you may keep with the original software vendor. So anybody who's not got third-party support in their 2020 plans is missing a huge trick, either because A, it'll save you money if you just do it, but also B, it's competitive negotiation leverage anyway, because everybody's got renewals coming up every year. So you've got to have it in your plan for 2020.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mark. It's been, as always, an enlightening and educational and great fun to talk to you, as always.
Thanks, Mark.
Really appreciate it. Hopefully I'll see you in London very soon. We might grab one of those Guinnesses before Christmas if we can, in one of maybe my uncle's pub in Covent Garden. I'm just going to close this out then. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to Brendan.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you again to Mark. We will be back before the end of the year. We'll be back before the end of the year. We'll have a podcast with another good friend of mine, Dan Sheffert from Paris, a lawyer made famous for his tackling Google and his advocacy for the rights in the digital age. We'll be back then. 2 guys discussing software.
2 Irish guys.
Thank you.
See you from us.
Thank you very much.